examine your reasons for wanting to help. Look at your donation as an investment. It's not charity as much as it's an investment in a child's future.
Welcome to Where Hope Begins, the Save One Life podcast. In honor of Save One Life's 25th anniversary, this show tells the story of how one simple act of compassion grew into a global lifeline for families living with hemophilia and other bleeding disorders. What began with one question, could one family help another, across borders, has become a movement built on dignity, opportunity, and hope. Because when one life is supported, generations can be transformed. I'm your host, Kai, and for our very first episode, we're starting at the very beginning with Save One Life's founder, Laurie Kelley. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kai.
It's wonderful to have you. So I guess let's just start from the very beginning. You've served the bleeding disorders community since 1989, and you founded Save One Life after witnessing devastating need firsthand. So what do we need to know about the path that brought you here?
Well, it wasn't any one thing, really. It was a kind of a confluence of events. First, the birth of my child with hemophilia in 1987, and then witnessing the pain that he had to suffer. It really opened my eyes to suffering in children in general and globally. And then in 1994, the Rwandan genocide had a part. I had a 1-month-old baby at that time, my third child, and watched the news daily of children suffering and babies who were orphans. I asked my then husband if we could adopt, and that wasn't in the cards, wisely. But I vowed then to do something to help children in developing countries. In 1996, I was asked by Bayer Corporation to develop a program to identify and train advocate patients in developing countries. So I was able then to start traveling and seeing firsthand how people lived and the challenges they faced. And then finally in 1999, a mom from New York of a child with hemophilia asked if we could start some kind of a child sponsorship program like Save the Children. So it was really her idea. And her comment made me realize that other people, too, were interested in helping kids who suffer in developing countries with hemophilia. And then it all kind of came together in 2000.
It's amazing to hear. So I guess let's go back to those early years. What did that teach you about fear and advocacy and what families actually need?
Well, again, getting out there and talking with American families first shows what their needs were. And at the time I started all of this, back in 1989, at that time, the hemophilia community globally was focused on the HIV scandal. Half of our U.S. community was infected with HIV and Hep C. And then new moms like me came in with infants who were not HIV affected. And we were actually being kind of neglected. Rightly so, the focus was on HIV-affected families. There were many battles to be fought there for care and support and changing people's perceptions. So by attending support group meetings, I began to hear the non-HIV community, people like me, what their needs were. Their needs were great because no one was really helping them. And so I decided to focus on what I knew best and what I lived, which was life with hemophilia without HIV and Hep C. But also we lacked resources, so I started to try to fill those resources.
Part of that journey was you wrote the book Raising a Child with Hemophilia, 1990. I think one of the first parenting books on hemophilia. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so again, it was the attending these support groups and then having my own experiences, I didn't know what I was doing when my child was born and went through a lot of painful episodes with him because I wasn't sure what the right things to do were. And it was actually the other parents in the support group who were giving me really great information. But my doctors and my nurses, none of them even had kids. So they kind of couldn't give us what to expect at the next stage and the next stage, but the other families did. So I started contacting other families and collecting information. And what it turned out to be was a hard copy portable manual that addresses all the different issues of child rearing, such as medical aspects, insurance, and consumer aspects of hemophilia. At that time, people were calling us patients, which even implies the term passivity. And as a business person, I had a business background, I wanted to call us consumers. And so as consumers, you have rights and responsibilities, and you have the right to ask questions, and you have the right to demand certain things, but you also have the responsibility of getting educated and speaking the same language as the doctors. So we tried to put that all into one book. And then changing their mindset alone on the idea that they were consumers also gives them the idea that they can be advocates and speak up for themselves and for their communities. And we also try to present all this information in very user-friendly terms so that any parent could pick up the book and quickly learn what to do, what to ask, and how to prepare for the next stage in their child's development.
Such important contributions to the hemophilia community, born out of, as you kind of put it, that initial fear, right? And not knowing what to do. So you had all of this energy and momentum. Tell us about this turning point in your life as you were traveling abroad in these developing countries.
Yeah, I was home in the 1990s raising my kids and writing. I had a newsletter, working on some children's books for hemophilia, but the Bayer Corporation had approached me and asked if I would consider traveling to developing countries and identifying, advocates there and try to help build their advocacy programs like we were doing here in the U.S. I have a master's degree in international business and economics, and my first passion has always been doing developmental work in overseas, but life had its other plans, so I never really got to it. But I was excited to actually get to do what my passion was, which was going to developing countries. So my first forays there, I was given a budget for travel, and I went to the countries where there really were no programs or there was no access to factor, nothing happening. So the first thing I had to do was just get out and see how do people live. And it was really eye-opening. And the first thing you learn is that there's different kinds of poverties and needs, and they can differ from country to country and from region to region. And even within one country, there's different kinds of poverty, like there's urban poverty and there's rural poverty, and they're very different. With urban poverty, you get a trade-off. You have better access to transportation and healthcare, but you have to deal with slums, crowding, lots of noise, the odors, crime. And then in the rural communities, it's quieter and even cleaner, but the trade-off is you don't have access to healthcare or even transportation to get healthcare. So families living on $1 a day typically only have one breadwinner and one who stays home with the children. And it might be a 1-room or 2-room shelter or house with a lot of crowding if it's a big family. I've seen parents that sleep on concrete floors or even dirt floors so the children can sleep in the beds all in one room. And in one bed, you might have 3 kids sleeping head to foot. There's no AC, there's no fans, this is in sweltering heat, there's no refrigerator because there's no electricity, no TV, and often there's no bathroom. There might be a public bathroom, like a porta potty or something for an entire community, or people just go out to the fields. It's a very rustic, rural way of living. And it's a degrading way of life in many ways. We want to try to find a way to give them some dignity in their life. And if a children has a chronic medical disorder like hemophilia, it has a bleed, and needs medical attention, it means that the breadwinner, often the father, might need to give up his job for the day to take the child to the hospital where they have to wait all day, and then the parent will lose the money for that day for his work. So oftentimes they give up taking the child in for medical care because they can't afford to lose a day's worth of work. And that way they eat, but the child suffers.
Right. And I know there was this idea that it's not necessarily about providing factor or healthcare. Can you talk a little bit about Save One Life's mission and foundation, the idea of an education or, groceries? Like, can you tell us about what sponsorship means and how it actually helps these families?
Well, yeah, as all these parents and their kids would come to meetings so we could talk to them to try to inspire them to advocate for themselves, I could just see that they needed medicine first and foremost. That was their greatest need. And then so many of them were uneducated. The kids would just drop out of school because they missed so much school. You'd end up with a 15-year-old who was still like in 2nd grade. And again, that's degrading for the child. Or kids that made it through primary schools but then couldn't go on to higher education because of their lack of mobility and their suffering. And then you could see that they just needed money for everyday expenses, food, medicine, clothing. Transportation's huge because you have to get to the medical facility to take advantage of any kind of medical care. And some of them didn't even have money for that. So little by little, as I mentioned before, it's the patients that tell you what they need if you listen. If you go and see it with your own eyes, talk to them, listen to them, ask them questions. And the most important component is going into their homes. And no one had ever done that before. I found out all the programs in hemophilia that existed, nobody ever went into the homes of the poor to see how they live and see what their needs were. The families would come to the clinic or they'd come to meetings. So nobody actually saw what their day-to-day life was. And once you go into their homes and see it, it becomes crystal clear what they need. So that's kind of all of our ideas came from the patients themselves.
Yeah. And I guess what was happening inside of you in those moments? Like, was it difficult to navigate like the emotions of what you were seeing?
No, I was raised with 6 brothers, so I'm pretty much a male thinker at times. So I don't waste time on words. I don't waste time. Like, I get right to the point, and I like to fix things. I've always been a
Yeah.
fixer. So for me, it was a huge challenge. I had no hands-on experience except going in there and just figuring it out. So I had confidence in myself that if I get there and see it, I'll figure something out. And it's very important to mention that none of this could take place without our program partners. So they are a huge component of everything. So to go to a country, you have to have a contact and you have to find someone you can trust and depend on. And we were very, very fortunate and blessed to find a lot of these people in the countries. If you don't have that, then you cannot have a program. It's just as simple as that. So again, they would help me. They would tell me what their needs were. And together we would figure out a strategy and a plan and not just impose what I think they need, but elicit from them, how do we do this? We see what the needs are. Now, how do we get from point A to point B, given that you live in, India or Pakistan or somewhere in Africa?
We're celebrating, 25 years of this work. And when you think about that, maybe 25 years ago, what would you tell that person, or like, what are you most proud of?
What I think of is gratitude more than pride, I guess, because I feel that there's always tremendous amounts of work to be done still. There's thousands more children to reach. There's more work to be done. There's more countries we need to reach. So I think after 25 years, what I look back on is mostly gratitude. I'm grateful that the families trust us to help them, and grateful to, first and foremost, the donors who make all this possible. The corporate donors, especially I'd like to call out Patrick Schmidt of FFF Enterprises, who's been with us from day one. He's a fantastic donor and supporter. You can have all the money in the world and just give it away, but if you don't have people on the ground running programs and overseeing everything, they have to deal with all the frustrations that come with living in a developing country, and yet they do their jobs, and most of them are volunteers. Actually, all of them are volunteers. They're pretty impressive people.
Amazing. And, we see firsthand the kind of the impact that, this collaboration of people has made. So, for anybody who's listening right now who is interested in your organization or even would want to sponsor a family, what's that first step they should take?
The easy answer is go to the website and check out the kids that we have who are waiting for sponsorship, saveonlife.net. But also, examine your reasons for wanting to help. Look at your donation as an investment. It's not charity as much as it's an investment in a child's future. So many people want to help. Sometimes they feel, I feel guilty, wealth guilt, if you will, just living in America for all of its issues that we have these days. America is still an incredible country that has vast resources and very good-hearted people, and trying to get them to see that the rest of the world is not so fortunate as we are. Even some of the most troubled people in our country are still so much better off than people in other countries. So we like to say that it's an investment in a child's future overseas, and I'd like people to think of it that way when they go and look at little faces. Sometimes you'll find a child whose heart speaks to you in various reasons. It's almost inexplicable.
Fantastic. And I loved how you put it as investment, right? As opposed to a charity, which is just the way we should be thinking about, everyone around us. Thank you so much for helping us kick off this podcast. And, we'll be sharing many more stories from all over the world in the coming episodes. But thank you again for being here today.
Thank you, Kai.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for listening to Where Hope Begins, the Save One Life podcast, because when one life is supported, hope doesn't stop there. It begins. Thank you for listening to Where Hope Begins, the Save One Life podcast, because when one life is supported, generations can be transformed. Presented by Save One Life in partnership with Balancing Life's Issues. Produced by me, Kai. Got an idea for the show? Send me an email at kai@balancinglifesissues.com. Did today's story move you? Sponsor a child at saveonelife.net/sponsorship. Anything else to add, Miles?
Yeah, Dada.